will be a caper called, not a caper, but the Watergate affair. Most of the national news media refer to it, or have referred to it in the not too distant past as the Watergate caper. But Mae, you don't really like the word Watergate caper, do you?
No, I don't like the word Watergate caper because it's the cover story for something which is very serious. But the tone of the exposure of what's happening in Washington in terms of corruption is becoming very serious now. The people who called it a caper or a light fantastic are realizing now that something very big is happening, and they can't put their finger on it. And there's an article in the New York Times this last Sunday called Watergate. It isn't all that funny.
Let's get to the New York Times in a second.
Okay.
First, there's a teaser for people. What about Dialogue Conspiracy? What is it about?
Dialogue Conspiracy, for those who haven't listened before, is a program where I try to give information about the past political assassinations in the United States of President John Kennedy, Senator Robert Kennedy, civil rights leader Martin Luther King, the accident at Chappaquiddick that took place to Ted Kennedy, the shooting of George Wallace at the shopping center in Maryland, are all part of a large conspiracy, I believe, of the same persons interrupting the electoral process. Every one of these accidents, the murder or the accident or the near murder, has to do with the election of who maintains the power in the United States and is directly related to the containing that throne in the White House. And I've spent years researching, mostly in the beginning, the ballistics, the fingerprints, the weapons that were used in each of these murders, and realized that the bullets in the victims didn't match the guns that were left at the scene of the crime, that the Justice Department never investigated the crimes, the FBI wasn't interested in finding out who did these things, and they're classified, in my mind and many people's minds, as conspiracies.
Okay, so it's sort of a current events program with ties to the past and a great deal of research constructing those ties, right?
Well, what we do each week, we take the news of the week and show how it relates to the past political assassinations or conspiracies that are going on at the present time. The value of the show now, talking at this time, is that these conspiracies existed when we first went on the air a year ago, June. It was so outrageous to talk about them. A lot of people weren't considering them or even thinking about them. But so much has been in the news about James Ray and Sirhan the last year and those trials and the shooting of Wallace, and you can see the discrepancy in the bullets. You're reliving what happened before over again now, and people can begin to understand conspiracy better. And the Watergate, what they call the Watergate caper, which I believe is tied into the extreme right wing that was planning the killing of Richard Nixon, is not a caper but a very serious game of a clandestine group in the White House that intended to overthrow the White House. Now, these are serious charges because as long as the men didn't achieve what they wanted to do, they can deny that that was their purpose.
And they have been denying that in the press the last few days.
They haven't been actually accused of the charges that I've made yet. Now, I've talked to Don Edwards, a congressman, this week. I talked to the writer in the New York Times. And they're just wedging their way into the conspiratorial link of the CIA men at the Watergate that were arrested and the past political assassinations. This is like growing grass through cement. It's taken 3 months of pounding away, spreading information, and it's seeping now into the news and into their stream of consciousness that maybe something serious is happening.
Yeah, I interrupted you at the New York Times. Do you want to pick up there, or do you want to...
Well, I have the article here of, just because you said it was a caper, that this particular writer, Walter Rugaber, is saying it isn't all that funny, and what they begin to talk as a caper in Washington as a slapstick with an air of unreality has a lot of explanations that aren't coming in yet. And
you said that a long time ago when you objected to the Watergate caper title.
I wanted to call it the Watergate affair, like the perfume affair which rocked England, the scandal. And it is a scandal. This particular scandal is being made subject of cartoons all over the country. You know, I take 8 papers a day, and the Washington Post will have a reprint of a Milwaukee paper cartoon, and the Miami paper will have a reprint of a Michigan cartoon, and they're using each other's, and they have all kinds of cartoons. They have Kleinitz and Richard Nixon sitting on a chest, and it's about to explode. It's like a bomb. It's a great big round thing, and they're sweating it out, and they're holding the lid down, and they've got signs all over, and little powder puffs are seeking out, like a bomb ready to explode, and they've got the ITT money and the secret $750,000 money and the $150,000 offered Klein is to stop one case, and Mr. Stewart, Nixon's friend, getting Justice Department to call off a case in San Diego, and the milk fund, the raise of milk prices because $350,000 was given to Nixon's campaign, and Andrea's getting a bank charter up in Minneapolis, giving $25,000 to Richard Nixon.
The list goes on.
It goes on and on, but the subject of the cartoons, Time Magazine had one this week of this skeleton coming behind a door, and Marie Stans is holding the door back, and there's a lady, like a voter, holding a person. She comes to Mr. Stans, and he says, "I assure you I'll have an answer as soon as I think of one." So the public, Marie Stans was a well-known Wall Street lawyer and banker, and he's the subject of a lot of criticism. Oh, here's the cartoon. I brought in Field says, "Believe me, I can explain
let me hold
this."
this up to the microphone here so people can see it.
Like television, yeah.
We have our limitations, folks.
It's a cartoon of a skeleton behind a door, and they're standing there holding the door back, and he's sweating where he stands. And he said, "Believe me, I can explain this as soon as I think of something."
This is almost as good as the Sunday Funnies on KGO. This is really good.
Yeah. Well,
you got any more we can try out on people?
I've got a lot of I have a whole filing section of just cartoons.
It's funny that, not funny, but interesting, that some of the cartoons that have been run, the editorial cartoons in some of the papers, have been more pointed than some of the editorials that usually run next to them.
Oh, yes, but the editorials are coming in very serious now. And there was one article this paper this week that I want to read because it's a memo from Charles Colson, the special counsel to the president. And Charles Colson is the CIA liaison between the far right-wing radical group. A lot of people say, well, why would anybody want to get Nixon, or why would anybody overthrow the government? Isn't Nixon as far right as you can get? And I say, oh, no, he's really a liberal. He's not as far right as you can get. There's a whole team from California to Florida, across this nation, from New Mexico and into Washington, that are ready to take over. They have Agnew right in position, and they think that Nixon is a cop-out. He served their purposes for a certain amount of years, and now they want to get him.
Okay, so now to Charles Colson.
Charles Colson is a White House staff member right next to Richard Nixon, a CIA man who hired Howard Hunt, one of the men who is being arrested with regard to the Watergate affair. He was at the hotel at the time 5 men were arrested, and he got away. And he was at the hotel, and Colson for the White House was the one who had hired him.
Where did this memo appear?
This appeared for the Washington Post and also the New York Times. And Colson had a memo to the White House staff dated August the 28th, that's this week. And his memo reads to this effect: there are 71 days left between now and the election. And every one of these is a campaign day. And every day, let me remind you, has 24 hours. Now, sometime during the campaign, you can recharge your battery. An occasional Sunday may be possible. Don't count on it. I want to make it perfectly clear what the policy will be for 71 days. No one is to plan any trips anywhere without my express approval. No one should be out of reach of the telephone. The White House switchboard must know at all times where everyone is. Each individual member of the staff should ensure that he or she can be reached anytime, night or day, by phone or page boy. No speaking engagements will be accepted. No trips will be planned without my knowing and approving in advance. Many of you have been through campaigns before. They are 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week job. If I offend any of you, he says, come around November the 8th. If I have bruised feelings or injure your morale, I'll be happy to make amends on November the 8th, assuming we have done our job and the results are evident. I can understand that you have gotten the wrong impression of me since so many erroneous things have been printed lately. Just so you understand me, let me point out that the statement in last week's UPI story that I once reported to have said I would walk over my grandmother if necessary is absolutely accurate. Signed, Charles Colson. Now, this is an indication. I have a copy of memos and activities that Lyndon Johnson had in the White House, and he kept track of staffs. He was very paranoid after the assassination of John Kennedy, and he began to step up a lot of surveillance. And he kept a staff record of every person on his staff who went out for dinner in Washington and who they ate with and who they saw. And they had to keep a regular computer-type operation. They had to check in and out of who was seeing who. Now, Charles Colson is a defendant in this lawsuit against the party, And he's a very important person. He's right next to Nixon in the White House, and he hired Hunt. So that nobody's going to squeal or talk. They are practically prisoners of Charles Colson. They can't go out and meet with somebody like UPI or AP. They're not ordinary citizens who have a life separate from the White House. By page boy or by phone, night or day, and you can't go anywhere. We may give you a Sunday off, but don't count on it.
So, are you saying then, again, that this is evidence of the tight control, that there, if this control weren't exerted, that some of the GOP staff people might be saying some things related to the Watergate?
Well, I think it's a very paranoid attitude, and I don't think the re-election of the president is endangered by these people taking a day off if they work 6 days a week.
Unless something
has happened. He says, don't be lulled into a false security by the polls that show the president ahead. They will change. He said, make every day count. I feel that this country has become paranoid and repressive beyond any imagination of most people, and to get a picture of this kind of memo shows that a lot of things, I feel a lot of violence is going to continue in the next 2 months, and they're going to be on an emergency basis. This is almost like an order, sit tight at the door. Charles Colson is giving an order. Either they can't see anyone or they have to tell him who they see. It's a dictatorial. I take it as being much more than is necessary to re-elect Richard Nixon. And in lieu of the circumstances of his tie-in with Hunt, I think it's a little bit oppressive and over. But he's given the order, and they have to respond to that or leave. Now, Julius Hobson is running on the Radical People's Party in Washington, D.C., along with Spock. And he sent a letter to Representative Don Edwards this week and asked Don Edwards, who's chairman of the House Subcommittee on Constitutional Rights, to get into that $10 million secret fund that we hear about with Richard Nixon all the time. And he claims that we have to know before the election if Richard Nixon is funded by the CIA. Now, this is I brought this in to share with you because my article in The Realist suggests that Nixon has been funded by that invisible government since 1945. But only through the fluke of the Watergate did we get a chance to see how the money is channeled. And we talk about that this week. I'm going to read a cartoon that was in the paper this week, which isn't funny, but it is, on the way the money is handled for clandestine activities. Did you see Buchwald's cartoon last week on the money?
No, I haven't.
It's clandestine money.
It's going to turn into the Saturday Funnies program.
Well, Saturday Funnies. See, Hobson is saying, the lawsuit against, the criminal suit against the men that broke in at the Watergate Hotel and the civil suit are being investigated and prepared now, but they're dragging their feet with every excuse. So, it will come after the election, who's involved and what happened. So now they've presented to a member of the Congress the fact that we have a right before the election to know if Nixon represents an agent of the CIA.
Are we going to get in today a discussion of the Common Cause suit, which is tied in with those funds?
Did you see the wording this week of the paper, of the attorney for Common Cause? It was in Thursday's paper. He said, you can't sue the committee to re-elect the president because we're only a committee set there to nominate him, not to re-elect him. They use every word. That has to be scraping the bottom of the barrel. He said it was only set up to nominate him, not to re-elect him, so you can't sue us.
Yeah, the committee to re-elect the president was only
set up to nominate him. So why don't they disband and go home? You see, Maurice Stans was given a new high position in that committee this week.
I think that they're going to change the name to the committee to really re-elect the president.
Well, I don't know how they have the nerve. How do you think he has the nerve to say that?
That's a joke.
Yeah,
I have to label my jokes from now on.
I know your jokes. I'm just trying to think how an attorney for the President Nixon can say we're only set up to nominate him when they're going full swing.
President Nixon said that nobody in his president's staff was involved in the Watergate affair, but he didn't refer to his staff at that time, and he's an attorney.
That was picked up in the papers in the East. In fact, they're using espionage reference now to the activity. I brought in two articles, one from the Newsweek that says that the secret money, this $350,000 in Stan's account, could be used for covert operations, and Time magazine uses this quotation that you did of President Nixon, where he said, no one in this administration presently employed was involved in the bizarre incident. And Time magazine says the operative phrase was presently employed because 4 members of the White House have resigned, quit, or been fired since the arrest. John Mitchell, Hugh Sloan Jr., Howard Hunt, G. Gordon Liddy. So
those are pretty top names, really, and they were on the staff of the White House or directly associated with it.
That's right. So Time magazine has an article called "The Watergate Royals On," And they're aware that this is a big story now, and they are coming out finally and saying, well, the president says this, but that's his operative language.
Sure. We challenged people last week to explain or to defend the president. I assume since we had no takers, that everybody saw right through that particular, what Time calls the operative phrase.
Yeah, well, there was an article by Carl Rowan in that Monterey Herald here, and he said maybe people aren't incensed because it's a question that all elections are done by crooks, so you just choose your own crook. It doesn't bother them what's happening at the Watergate, but the important thing is to visualize it at your own level. If you leave your home and go somewhere and somebody gets in your desk and photographs your papers or your letters, you'd be really angry if it happened to you.
Well, I think it's a question. I'm wondering whether you don't agree that most people have a sort of shady picture of politics, that politics are somewhat corruptible, that this sort of thing is sort of expected. It's part of the ground rules.
Yeah, but you see, we're talking now in an age where you have a choice whether you're going to bomb a war and escalate or not bomb, or bomb dikes and starve these people out, or use napalm or electronic warfare. And if you get a man that represents the aerospace industry, the people that give him money, that finance the oil companies, that finance the weapons manufacturing, then he's going to give them their war because they put him in office. That's why it's so important to find out who's funding Richard Nixon, and always was, but nobody seemed to care, is that do you justify the war and escalate? If you got no money from the people who were carrying the war on, and you got a lot of money from people that were building housing in the slums and schools and hospitals and trade schools and places for education, would you be more into a domestic scene if the domestic people could give you the money that the warfare people
Granted, that sounds logical, but you haven't answered my question. Don't you think that the public expects a certain amount of graft and corruption and sneaking and spying in politics
Well, they can't afford
today?
to anymore.
I mean, but do they expect it, do you think?
I think the
do you think
public...
that's part of the reason why the public isn't as incensed as you and your friends, or me personally? Or
I think the public accepts anything. They accept... If they go to the poll and elect a president, he's killed, they just accept the man he chose as vice president. I think the people are numbed by this indifference. I spoke with a group of students that came to my house this week from Santa Cruz University and from Palo Alto. And I suggested that if you're incensed about the assassinations or the archives being locked up or not having access to who funded Nixon for the $10 million, just knowing that your milk's going up and the war is escalating and people are getting bank charters with that other money that we've had a peek at, then start a boycott. Maybe colleges starting, and I'm going to be talking to different colleges, campuses, and maybe the young people through various newspapers and underground press should begin to boycott certain stores just on the basis that if you don't pressure the government, we care, but we can't do it alone. And if you don't pressure the government, we'll make our own bread, we'll make our own clothes, we won't do any Christmas shopping. Christmas is coming up, and we just won't go in your stores. If the campus is starting, say at New York with WVAI and Santa Cruz and Stanford here, there are a group that came down to see me, and get it to Berkeley. We have a list of things we want to know, and I brought in a list of secrets. And
it may just happens to have a list of secrets.
See, I have a list of secrets that the kids should know, and if you're not going to let us know these things, we're going to say Mr. Safeway or Macy's or whatever stores, we'll just stay away. Make a list of 20 places in each neighborhood and say, because you're not pressuring Mr. Tunney or Cranston or your congressman to get to the archives to find out who kills the presidents and senators, we're going to boycott you in our hometown.
Okay, but that's assuming that people care, that people feel that this isn't to be expected from politics.
No, the young people care.
You're putting your hope there, then.
I've had a lot of young people. There was a law student that came down to the house, and his uncle is prominent in politics in the McGovern camp. His father's a professor at Stanford, and he goes back to his father and says, this information on John Kennedy's autopsy or on the gunman is locked up in the archives, and the professor at Stanford doesn't care. So he teaches at law school. So the students, a group of them, wanted to see how they could get the father to care. So they sort of went to different students and had seminars about the assassination and said, now let's take it to the professor and see what he does as a teacher, not as a father, but as a teacher. So they were ready to, when school opens in September, the boys try to get his father interested, and he doesn't care. So the students will approach to him like, if you're a professor, why don't you do this? The young people care, and there is a generation gap, and the only way you're going to break it is not through logic, but by putting them up against the wall, counting the bullets, and saying, now what are you going to do about it? If you're a phony, just shut up, and if you're not, produce. And this is what they're going to do with this particular professor, who's the son of one of the people who's interested in the assassination. Time magazine, just finishing this one article, said if the Watergate controversy is stilled, the larger furor over Nixon's campaign funds may go on. McGovern said, I have no doubt but what this issue will catch fire. You cannot make a serious bid for the presidency of the United States anymore and cover up a secret fund of $10 million. See, that's the secret fund. I brought a list in of some of the secrets I talk about. Why is it important to get that $10 million fund that was closed off before April the 7th into the news? When the men were arrested at the Watergate, a few checks that showed up in the bank of one of the men arrested, Bernard Barker, gave an inkling of how Nixon is funded, because one man, that Mr. Andreas from Minneapolis, gave $25,000 to the committee to re-elect the president, and he handed it to another friend from Minneapolis down at a golf course in Miami, and both of them just right afterwards got a bank charter at Minneapolis for a savings and loan bank, which is usually hard to get. And he got this bank charter in a hurry, and both men are going to be on the board of directors of that bank. The milk price went up just with these donations to Nixon, and they had said flatly, we won't raise the price of milk. Then the people went into the White House and sat with Richard Nixon. The price of milk went up. Now, there's a question.
Coincidence.
$89,000 was in the bank account of Bernard Barker in Miami. And I keep bringing it up for the last few weeks because the channeling of that money is so important. It goes from 4 men in Houston down up to Washington to the committee, then to Mexico, where a man now who received that money says he doesn't know about it. Somebody else, Mr. DeGuerra, doesn't know about it. Then it goes to San Francisco and Chicago, and then it ends up in Miami at Barker's account. Now, this is clandestine money. No matter what you think they're going to do, this is not just plain, simple losing. They call it washing it, to lose the traces of who gave it to Richard Nixon. If a Democrat in Houston, Texas, thinks Nixon's the best president for him, he should say, I give you $30,000 or $100,000. I'm a Democrat. You know, there's no law that if you're a Democrat, you have to vote Democrat. And we should know who wants Nixon in, because later new laws are passed. And he works with Perot, Ross Perot, the billionaire from Blue Shield, Blue Cross, and the prices keep going up on the cost of Blue Cross, and their profit went up $10 million this year, and yet the medical care prices keep mounting. With no control on that, our Blue Cross bill came last week. It's $200 every 4 months for Blue Cross protection. It's $800 a year. And the same week that I got the bill, I read that they had profits of $10 million this year. Profit of $10 million on a health service. They're raising the cost, and out of that profit, Perot made billions, you know, off of Medicare and Blue Cross. And what if he
need to change the medical system?
Well,
this doesn't fit in, but I've been meaning to say this somewhere for a long time. I think it's in China or Japan, where the doctors get paid when you're well. As long as you're well, they keep getting paid. As soon as you're sick, you stop paying until you are well again.
Oh, really?
That makes more sense.
To keep you well.
To keep you well. That means that preventive medicine is something which doctors will practice for profit. Or keep you well because the money will keep you. It doesn't have anything to do with dialogue conspiracy.
No, it has something to do, because these groups that fund the president, if they make huge profits off of your health or body, you have a right to know. We're off on a tangent, but the secret money is in the news so much that it's good to analyze what all the fuss is about, you know, of putting Richard Nixon in. And if men fight socialized medicine in this country, are they putting money into his campaign? Are the richest doctors keeping people from having medical care by funding him? You know, that has not to do with the political assassination.
Probably I'll find out that it isn't Japan or China. Somebody will correct me, but it is one of the countries that does that.
Where they pay you to keep well?
Where you pay the doctor to keep you well instead of to fix you when you're sick.
Well, some of these secrets that have to do with political assassinations, which I listed, that the students could work on is, number one, that $10 million fund, which is the way clandestine money finances assassinations. When a guy like James Ray spends thousands of dollars over a $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 in 1 year period, the money comes from somewhere, and you have to wash it, change hands, and do a lot of things with it before it falls in his hand. The Lincoln Club is a secret organization formed in 1963 that finances and puts Nixon into power. We don't know who the members are. how do we know the way he votes, the way he looks at the war, the way he looks at the domestic problems hasn't something to do with the money people give him to stay into office? The National Archives should be opened up. That's something the students, if they have a boycott, if we can get a boycott going, it'd be on certain terms that we'd find out who is locking, we know who's locking the archives, but we want to know why they can't get in there and have an educational process of what was in there and what could be learned if people could get in and examine the evidence and the testimony of Robert Kennedy's murder or Martin Luther King's or President John Kennedy's. And then the Tyrol Club. Oh, this last week, McGovern finally made a speech hitting Nixon's tax plans and his loophole for the oil people. And he referred to John Connolly's private oil clubs, you know, that keep John Connolly going. Well, the Tyrol Club in Jamaica is the world headquarters for the syndicates, for British intelligence. It was formed Mr. Stevenson of British intelligence and John Connolly and former Nazis and white Russians. And we should have the name of everyone who lives on that island. Not temporary guests or anything, but who does John Connolly associate or live with? This is a secret club like a James Bond thing, and we don't know who attends this club. I have a lot of information that indicates we should know who John Connolly meets with.
Okay, we'll have more on this list of secrets you should know on part 2 of Dialogue Conspiracy after we take a break to rest our throats and identify the station that you're listening to right now. Dialogue Conspiracy with political research specialist Mae Brussell. We were interrupted in the middle of everything you always wanted to know about secrets, but were unable to ask, or able to ask and unable to get answers to.
Well, we're giving a list of subjects that should be listed for people to become familiar with in order to understand the past political assassinations or what's happening in America. There are too many secrets. There's hearings that are locked up, like the inquest of Ted Kennedy and Mary Jo Kopechne. Everything in Washington, the Watergate thing now is locked up secret. Judge Ritchie said he wouldn't do it. The people have the right to know. And yet every question that's asked these people is secret. And even if they're purging themselves as secret, we don't know what they're saying, and nothing is available. And in a society where a democracy is to exist, you have to have the truth, and we're getting less truth all the time. One of the things I'd like to know is Project Paperclip. That was a secret code name.
Project what?
Paperclip.
We've talked about it
we've
before,
talked about
but it's somehow escaped me.
Well, it's a book that it brings up the subject of about 600 Nazis, 560 Nazis that came over here after World War II and were located in universities and places of education and scientific labs and scientists in aerospace. And two of the most famous members of Project Paperclip were Werner von Braun of the Space Agency and Walter Dornberger. Well, both of them, by anybody's language, would say they were war criminals. They worked at rocket factories where bones were piled up, and they should have been considered war criminals because they were geniuses of a rocket kind. They were allowed to be useful in the United States to help build the atomic bomb and weapons. But there's an indication that Dornberger, who from the Fort Worth area, he's the head of Bell Helicopter, one of the top men there. And Lee Harvey Oswald's friend Michael Payne works for Dornberger. There was a link of aerospace and Nazis with the political assassinations. And it would be interesting, years later, they came over in 1945, so it would be interesting now to get the name of everyone who came in on Project Paperclip, where they're located today, how much money they made in that interim, and how effective they were teaching at the universities, these former Nazis. What they actually contributed. Are they into the lobotomy, mind control, radar, laser beams? Where are these great geniuses? You know, all these diabolical little things are taking place. Who are the men? And then
what have you got next on your list?
Well,
Tackwood.
Well, Tackwood had allegations.
Explain Tackwood. There are probably some people out there who
don't
still
know
haven't heard about
Tackwood.
Louis Tackwood.
Well, he's an agent provocateur that worked for the L.A. Police Department for 9 years and made very serious allegations about justice in the state of California, and a national group from Washington to California that would take over this government, similar to 7 Days Inmate, overthrow this government, and then kill Nixon. And Tackwood has been very important in the Watergate episode because his contact man, he said it was Mr. White, and that's the name that Howard Hunt uses, and another contact man was Mr. Martin, who's James McCord, who was arrested at the Watergate. And I think Tackwood had a press conference in October 71 and made about 10 very serious allegations about the shootout at Marin County where the judge was killed, and then the killing of George Jackson and Jonathan Jackson. And nobody has checked out his allegations of a serious nature. No one in the Justice Department, no private investigators. The little bit that people have gone into as private researchers turns out to be accurate. But it's hard to get people in public office to even touch this stuff, and yet it affects all of our lives. If the criminal conspiracy section of the Justice Department plans conspiracies, which is what I maintain they do, and he worked for them when they did it, these people should be removed from office. There isn't any great mystery or mystique about all this. You know, people think if everybody's corrupt, how do you find truth? There's a lot of good people that would work in the Justice Department, or lawyers or policemen. Not everyone is a conspirator. You know, there's a lot of good people that could do the job, you know, and if we rooted out the ones that are making the trouble. I don't think it's that complicated.
And your last on the list of secrets.
Patrick Gray.
Patrick Gray III.
He hasn't, a lot of people, this is one of the things I thought of for a boycott, that people should insist that his credentials be presented to the American people. Since he was appointed temporary head of the FBI, we've had the shooting of Brammer, which is filled of Wallace, and the arrest of Brammer, which is filled of conspiracy evidence that there were two gunmen. It just reeks of a crossfire. He's not investigating the Watergate Hotel. He gave orders in Miami that the FBI weren't to look into anything unless he told them. And that's the way he's conducting his investigation. The quotation of Frank Mankiewicz last week, the Justice Department investigating the Watergate is like a fox taking care of the chicken house. And they are stopping anybody from looking around for information, and a man like that is famous for ending cases. He doesn't start them, he puts the lid on them.
Yeah, with all of that whole list of things that young people should demand to find out about, secrets that they should get details on, it's a long list, covers a wide range of subjects. Isn't there something that should be done first, some priority, something to concentrate on?
Well, what I have here is like 7 subjects: the $10 million fund, the Tyrol Club, the Lincoln Club. A paragraph, if you mimeographed a sheet, a paragraph would explain why you want the names, what you want. And
a paragraph to who? Who do you write?
Well, to the different students. Get out a sheet or a flyer to the different students to ask for information on these particular things for various reasons, which are the following, and just list 1, 2, 3, and 4, just to let the merchants or the people in your hometown know that the system doesn't work up above, and that everyone at each level in your own hometown maybe should get working on this and demand answers in the East instead of letting them cover them up. Every time something comes that they cover up, you should counteract with a response, I don't settle for that. There's a question of Patrick Gray being appointed the head of the Justice Department, and a conservative group in Los Angeles. This is the more far right wing.
The head of the Justice Department or the FBI?
Yes, of the FBI. Well, he's in the Justice Department now, and they said a conservative grassroots Republican organization's board of directors called for appointment of a veteran agent to head the FBI rather than the political crony of Richard Nixon. The directors of the group, the United Republicans of California, disapprove of L. Patrick Gray as FBI director. He has never served in the FBI. He has been a personal friend of Nixon's for 25 years. And they were very critical of a political man in the FBI. They said that they should choose someone who's been there at least 12 years, free of the appearance of political attachment in any investigation of the Watergate Democratic bugging case. Now, this is the conservative grassroots Republican saying that Patrick Gray isn't fit to investigate the Watergate. So you're getting a cross-section of a lot of people.
Yeah, you wouldn't expect a Republican group, especially a conservative Republican group, to come out with a statement like that.
Well, that's right, but those people in the White House that were arrested and their links to the White House are only an elite, small echelon. That's what I'm trying to say. It's a CIA police state, and the average Republican isn't included even in the conventions of what he wanted. It was just thrown, here's Agnew, here's Nixon, and even a man who read a prayer, he had to submit the prayer, what it said, how long it was. Everything is screened. The Republicans aren't in the scene anymore. They've been pushed aside. You know, and they feel that this man isn't doing the right thing, and I guess this man, Patrick Gray III, okay. They feel that he should be removed because he's only serving Nixon and not the Republicans. So there's that fine line that I recognize, and I hope people can begin to recognize that all Republicans aren't Republicans, just like all Democrats aren't Democrats. There are a lot of conservative Republicans who don't like what's happening to the party. It's like that book by Whalen, Catch a Falling Flag. He was writing Nixon's speeches. He was working for the Republican Party, and he realized that what Nixon was doing was pushing aside the political Republican Party and taking orders from an elite small group that had nothing to do with the American system of justice or fair play or what America is about at all. See, now, Arthur Bremer was mentioned by Schmidt this week, the man who's running for American Independent Party. And he said that there's more than 2 gunmen in the shopping center. It was a crossfire and a conspiracy. There were 4 references to the shooting of Wallace this week. Jim Garrison came out publicly and said there was more than 1 gunman in the shopping center.
What's its source?
Well, you count the bullets, the Computer and Automation magazine and the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the doctor reports after Wallace was shot. Wallace was shot at gunpoint up close with a man standing in front of him shooting 5 bullets from a 5-bullet revolver. And there were about 7 to 8 bullets in the body of Wallace, the victim, according to the doctor's reports. That can be verified. Bullets? Yeah, that went through him, separate ones. And then there were 3 other people shot at the shopping center who had surgery, and they were not photographed or behind Governor Wallace in a position where it could ricochet or hit them. They were not that near to him, and it's never been explained how 3 bullets in them hit them, like the one guard who got surgery in the throat in the Adam's apple. It wasn't explained which bullet went through Wallace that got up to an Adam's apple, because the high bullet in Wallace, one lodged in his stomach, one in his spine. So
you said there were others that were referring to Bremer this week?
Yes.
Besides Garrison?
Besides Garrison, Mr. Schmidt came out with...
Sorry, did you identify Schmidt?
Schmidt is the man running for the American Independent Party now that Wallace said he isn't going to...
Schmitz.
He's the John Berger who
from Orange County.
Lost the election, the congressional election from Orange County.
Right, the President Nixon's home district.
Yeah, and so he's running on, and he claims that there are conspiracies in the United States and conspiracies that kill candidates or attempt to kill them, and that Wallace was one of them. And he mentioned, this is interesting because we brought this up on a show last May after Wallace was shot. He mentioned that the John Birch magazine, American Opinion, is coming out this month with a implication that the man who was killed, or the boy that was killed, a friend of Bremer's, was part of the conspiracy and was killed. He was related to the conspiracy. Remember we said there was a friend of his that died just before he had a close friend and that guy was wiped out? Well, that article will be out in about 2 weeks. And then Computer and Automation, which did a 4 to 6 page article on the shooting of Wallace. Now, I bring that out because, as I say, the Kennedy thing was 9 years ago, but this is only September, and Wallace was shot in May. And the evidence of counting the bullets and the look at the trial and the lack of ballistic evidence that Bremer was doing all this is out in the open. And I keep repeating because I wish that, with school going back and the young people listening, that they grasp what I'm saying, because the Justice Department is supposed to find out who did it, and they don't do any of this. All these publications come out, and the Justice Department, Patrick Gray, don't even answer them. They don't even care how many bullets there were. They made a remark that Bremer was tried on a civil case, and he's held for federal, too. There's another charge that overlaps the shooting of Wallace and shooting the other people. So the federal government announced that they may not prosecute him. They haven't decided whether they want to prosecute him or not. Now, I don't know why that is, except maybe new evidence would come up at the trial. And then they also announced that he's been moved to a separate cell, and he's isolated by himself, and they're going to send him to a hospital. And if they think he needs it, like he's supposed to be in jail 63 years, but if his mental condition is such that he stays longer, the mental hospital takes care of him even after the sentence runs out. So he's taken care of by the Army hospital. He'll never get out of that hospital, and how is he going to get, if some sharp lawyer came in and took this stuff, maybe they could ask for a retrial, but I'm sure there'll be legal loopholes on that. And they'll make him take a public defender. When you want a new trial, a public defender is put on you sometimes, and you can't. This happened to Hugo Pinell out here in Salinas when he had a trial for allegedly killing a guard at Soledad, and he had his own lawyer and was promised he could have his own lawyer. And when they found out that this conservative Republican person sympathetic Hugo was going to take the trial. They hurried the trial up in Salinas and wouldn't let his own lawyer do it and gave him a public defender that didn't defend him. And he didn't get to have his own trial, and to have a new trial is expensive, and he's already marked as the man who killed the guard because the other one found him guilty. The fact that he couldn't have a trial isn't important, you know. There was an article this week about electronic surveillance under President Johnson. More Army spying, I guess you saw that, the surveillance that had gone on after Johnson was inaugurated and the extent it went. But one of the important things was the bugging of the Huey Newton trial and the surveillance of that, not only Republican convention, but the Newton trial, because when Pinnell's trial was going on in California, and he talked about a conspiracy in the state of California that involved Evel Younger and Procuni of the prison system and Raymond Parr, the warden up at San Quentin, then all the lights went out in the court and everything. He was saying there was a conspiracy against him to pin this murder on him. All the lights went out in the court, remember that, and everyone left, and it was about 10:30 in the morning. They said recess till 12, and we went out, and then when we came back, the judge closed the defense, wouldn't let him speak any more about what was happening. He never took the stand again. They began summing up the case, the trial was over. And I knew the room was bugged because he was into some really heavy stuff. And I was writing down what he said, and then I called Salinas, the power and light company, in different places, and the electricity didn't go out anywhere in Salinas except that room. So you may wonder, well, what's the value of bugging a trial? But if something gets pretty heavy or you want to control it, you can turn the trial off, recess it, give a message to the judge, and it's over. And the person never gets back on the stand to do what he wants to do. Pinnell never was able to get back then and defend himself. The effect of trials, when you talk about dialogue, conspiracy, just I want to get off for a minute on the Watergate. In the time of the Angela Davis trial, there was a shootout in front of the jail. A man was killed, and some inmates were involved. It was just at the time the jury was going to the trial, and it really stunk to high heaven. And they killed Jimmy Carr the same week in San Jose, and I felt that these were provocateurs trying to frighten the jury. Look at the black people when they're out, they shoot each other out. Look at the dangers we're in. Well, a man surfaced now, he's out of jail, and he surfaced this August, this last month. And he asked for asylum. He's living up in Seattle now, and he said he was paid to stage a jailbreak 100 yards from the courthouse where Angela's on trial. Did you ever see these articles, Phil? He was paid to stage it. And would you know his lawyer is Melvin Belli, the same Warren Commission lawyer, the CIA lawyer, you know, the same team. The man who staged the jailbreak was paid, offered $1,000 to stage the jailbreak at the time of Angela Davis's trial. Now, we're talking about the criminal conspiracy section different times on our program of the police departments. Here a man was shot in cold blood at the shootout at the time Angela Davis was on trial to get fear and hysteria into the community. They sacrifice a man and shoot him, you know, and stage this jailbreak 100 yards from the courthouse at the time that Angela was being tried, and he said it was financed. Now, he said it was financed by the communists to create an atmosphere of violence. He wants his money. He knows that the communists wouldn't do it because it would bring more repression on them to see these people shooting each other out right in front of the jury. And, of course, Leo Branton, one of her attorneys, Angela, said it's the most outrageous thing I've ever heard. I can't think of anything more prejudicial. It could possibly have helped. See, the attorney for Angela said there isn't anything more prejudicial than this kind of shooting a man on the streets when they're coming, the jury's going to work. So there were several articles this last week, but we didn't get into them, on this man who wants his money now, and he went to the office of Evel Younger, and his attorney is Belli, and he's out at, see, he was an inmate at Santa Clara County, and they offered him all this bread, and now he's out and he's living in Seattle, so he says, okay, give me my money, I staged the shootout. That's what agent provocateur is, you know, Phil. A lot of people, maybe I'll summarize what it is, people don't realize how conspiracies are staged.
You mentioned, excuse me, a minute ago, you called Melvin Belli the CIA attorney. Yeah. Without getting you off on a half-hour tangent, because that will run us over.
Yeah.
Why do you say Melvin Belli is a CIA attorney?
Oh, he works for
How do you back that up?
He works for the Kaplan Foundation. He's the attorney for Joel Kaplan, the boy that was flown out of that jail in Mexico. Every case that he has is just about is military or personal.
Which jail in Mexico? You're making an
in Mexico City, an American boy who was an agent of the CIA was arrested for killing one of his co-workers, and A helicopter landed. He's the son of a very wealthy family that is the front for a CIA foundation, and a helicopter landed in the courtyard of the jail, and the boy was flown up to Sausalito, and we've never heard anything of the case since, and Belli was the attorney. When Jack Ruby shot Lee Harvey Oswald, he had a lot of attorneys that would have taken the case. They were kicked out of the case. Their lives were threatened, and Belli was assigned to the case. And
by who?
By, well, it was a deal. See, Ruby worked with the syndicate and organized crime and the anti-Castro Cubans, and they also worked with the oil people in Texas. There were a group of people in Washington, Texas that didn't like John Kennedy, and each one had a piece of the action. One was involved in the assassination, some were involved in the cover-up, some housed the people for the getaway, the crossfire, but Belli was assigned to Jack Ruby. Now, I don't know who called him, but he came in, took care of the Ruby case, never let Ruby tell what happened. Ruby wanted to tell, and Belli said the very first part of Ruby's testimony, the Earl Warren, is, I want to tell what happened in Dallas. I want the record straight. And Belli said, no, that's premeditation. You can't do that. So he tried him as having epilepsy, and that's what they gave the jury. Ruby wanted to tell. He said, because of what I did, people have power today that they never would have had. That's in Volume 5 of the Commission hearings. He said there'll be a lot more deaths that are going to follow, and persecutions, and a lot of people will be killed because I gave these people the power, and I shouldn't have done it, and now I want to talk. Well, Belli wouldn't let him talk. That was his attorney. And Belli has been on many famous cases. He sneaks into, right now he's doing a prisoner case, which I hate to see him handle because of his past affiliations with people from the Central Intelligence Agency. He's representing the families that are suing Soledad for the killing at the Yard. I think it's trouble when he gets into these things because he is associated with CIA foundations and projects for them. And so, again, the boy who was paid to finance or stage the breakout at the time, Angela Davis's trial, appeared this week and said, well, it was supposed to be staged for an effect. There was another article this week about Mary Sirhan this last week in August, and it tells about their life, and it's pretty dismal, and they're not living on much money. And Sirhan's brother, Sharif, said, this is in quotes from the Washington Post, he expects the family lives will go on being troubled until the truth comes out in the Sirhan case, and then everything will be all right. He himself cannot reveal the truth because the threats against his life, he says, but he maintains that officials could find it if they wanted to. And he's written a number of letters to officials about the case, including the president, and has received polite but non-committal replies. Sirhan is innocent. He did not do it, Sharif said. And Sharif acknowledges that Sirhan was captured at the scene and identified by bystanders as the assassin. He refused to elaborate and said there would be no appeals on the trial, that his brother didn't do it, and when the truth comes out. They speak about this all the time, and I think they believe it, and I think they're right. This movie will be coming out. I'm anxiously awaiting it, called The Second Gun. I keep talking about it every week because some people may be listening one week and they won't pick it up, and the movie will be coming along soon, and maybe you'll remember I mentioned it. It's the Second Gun is the story of the shooting in the Ambassador Hotel, and it's newsreel shots and interviews with the ambassador and autopsy x-rays of Robert Kennedy, and presents evidence that there could have been a gunman, and it's strongly indicated enough to make a movie that Robert Kennedy was shot from the back of the head.
You don't have an exact date when that movie will be coming out?
No, he's having trouble getting distributors. He wants it out before the election because he wants the truth told. Don't forget, it was Richard Nixon who succeeded in that election. Robert Kennedy was not able to run against him. On the night of the primary, he did well, and he could have been a big contender had he been allowed to live. So Mr. Chirac is trying to get the movie out before the elections, but I wonder if any theater will have the nerve to do it. I hope so. It just doesn't seem that there's much courage around these days. And
maybe we just have a couple of minutes.
Yeah.
Do you want to
summarize
start summarizing? And
well,
anything here that you want to cover that we haven't covered real quick?
Let's summarize clandestine money and CIA plots with Art Buchwald. He had an article, Around America with GOP.
Another cartoon for the Saturday Funnies, too.
Well, he says the Republicans are having trouble explaining how they collect donations. So this is how the system works, and I'll read you part of this as much as we have time, and this is exactly how you fund assassinations in one way or another. This is the way it goes. He says, when someone gives $25,000 donation as a check to the committee for the re-election of the president, its official is sent to pick it up, and then they cash it at a bank in Houston.
Then another official picks up the cash and flies it to Portland, Maine, where it is placed in a safe in the office of a lawyer for Nixon. After a week, the money is taken out of the safe by another Republican official who takes it to Wall Street and purchases a cashier's check with it. A cashier's check is turned over to a public relations man who carries it to Minneapolis and hands it to a courier who flies the check to Seattle, where it is cashed and used to buy short-term municipal notes at 6%. Well, then these notes are then placed in a special bra of a Republican National Committee woman who flies to San Francisco. The Republican committee woman turns the notes over to Governor Reagan's chauffeur, who drives to Los Angeles and delivers them to John Wayne's business manager. He takes them to the First National Bank of San Clemente, where he cashes them. The cash is handed to a close friend of Maurice Stan's, who buries the money in a cigar box in his backyard under an avocado tree. A week later, at midnight, Frank Sinatra and Efren Zimbalist Jr. dig up the box and fly it to Palm Springs. The cash is then converted into diamonds, which are placed in the false bottom of a suitcase taken by Sammy Davis Jr. to a New Orleans place and placed in an old grandfather clock on the plantation of a Democrat for Nixon. 2 weeks later, the diamonds are removed from their hiding place and converted into soybean futures.
Andreas was in the soybean business up in Minneapolis.
The soybean futures are then sold for IT&T bonds at 8%. These bonds are taken by Greyhound bus to El Paso, where they are placed in a waterproof packet and turned over to a frogman who swims the Rio Grande with them on his back. It's getting more involved as we go. Then a Mexican for Nixon on horseback picks up the packet on the other side of the river and rides to Mexico City, where the bonds are cashed for pesos. The pesos are placed in a bank. 2 weeks later, a bank in Miami sends a draft to the bank in Mexico City for $25,000. The money is cabled to Miami, where it is put into the bank account of a former CIA man. The money remains in the account until someone in Washington wires the CIA man to give the cash to a Cuban refugee. The Cuban refugee then takes the money and uses it to pay outstanding bills for the Republicans. Then Buchwald goes on to say there are probably easier ways for the Republicans to handle their financial contributions, but so far they haven't been able to come up with any. But a Republican finance man assured us, meaning Buchwald, we're working on it.
Yeah,
that's an incredible. That is not an account of the way the money goes. It may be, but it doesn't purport to be. Art Buchwald is known for his writing, of course, his humorous, satirical writing. But I think there's more than just, there is some biting satire in those comments by Buchwald. Those are not just idle words jotted down on paper.
Yeah, we're talking about clandestine financing. That's the way it really goes. You can't find it or trace it, That's what it's all about.
It is funny, though.
Isn't it?
I missed that. I'm glad we got a chance to...
I'll copy if you want. I think it's very true that people say, there was no conspiracy to kill Robert Kennedy. Who did it? I'm supposed to produce the canceled check. There's no way. Or James Ray, I've read on the program how he spent his money, the trips he went. Maybe we can do that again next week on how many cities he went to and where he went and resort hotels and his facelifts and his cars and his possessions and things. And it was this kind of a journey. Maybe we should read it next week and read about James Ray and show how money travels.
Okay, that's Dialogue Conspiracy, parts 1 and 2 for this Saturday afternoon. Our thanks to Art Buchwald for supplying the humor and the political comment all rolled into one. Dialogue Conspiracy features Mae Brussell, political research specialist, and it is pre-recorded. This has been Dialogue Conspiracy, a public affairs presentation of KLRB News. If you have questions that you